All right, everybody. I think we must get going. And Fiona, it's really nice to have a small crowd so that you can actually do some exercises with everybody and give us a chance to work through what it is that you're doing on the screen. So thanks for arriving, everybody. And if people do come during the course of the session, I'm sure they'll slip in, and I'm sure that people will also be able to have a look at the recording once it is that we've done with the session. I do want to thank you, Fiona, for giving up not only your time, but your absolute expertise in guiding us through this discussion on real digital literacy, as opposed to just knowing where the on switch is, and perhaps guiding us towards curriculum decisions that work in the idea of digital literacy. And certainly in this segment today, the concept of AI literacy and what it is that not only we want our students to be able to do, but what should we as staff members be thinking when we start using these kinds of tools. So over to you, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks, Shira. I just want to confirm that you can see my presentation.
Yes, we can.
You can. Fantastic. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this final session in terms of digital literacy and now AI literacy. As I go forward, as I have been, we'll be looking at the different elements of the digital capability framework, but now bringing in just excellent work from their National Centre for AI and Tertiary Education. They're very proactive in this regard. They've produced quite a lot of material. They're doing quite a lot of research, actually. In fact, a phenomenal amount of research on AI in higher education. As I specified previously, I am using JISC because they have a very strong focus on higher education, as I say, in tertiary education. Okay, just to briefly have a look at where we've been. There are different types of capabilities in the JISC digital capabilities framework. There are 6 in total. I have really focused more on, I would say, about 5 of them. As I said, digital well-being, I have not really focused on. But just to recap, the first is digital proficiency productivity. As I've mentioned previously, that is computer literacy, what we regard as computer literacy. And, especially in terms of what we're going to be discussing in this session, the assessment of and the value of particular digital tools and applications for a specific task. That's where the AI aspect it really starts to come in, is to be able to assess the value of a specific tool for a particular type of work. But all of these points obviously contribute to that whole the idea of digital proficiency and productivity, which we would regard as computer literacy, or as was. Then we have the information and data media literacies. Lots of these apply in terms of AI. The most basic thing is obviously to use search engines, catalogs, and so forth. The library database, connectivity and so forth, to actually find different resources and so forth. But then again, we have the assessment of the value, credibility, and relevance of the information that you retrieve, in relation to a specific task. So that is very much that very much kind of dovetails with the whole AI literacy approach. Also understanding how data is used, how to construct arguments in cases, critique specific uses of data, and so forth. Again, this speaks to what we're going to be looking at later, which is the prompt engineering. And then, of course, the ethical side of things, including academic integrity. All of this speaks to some of the challenges we've been having with AI since around about November 2022. Whoops, sorry. Okay, and then we move on to the communication side of things. This is very much being able to communicate using digital devices, software, apps, whatever it might be, using a range of these things, and also communicating in different contexts, whether it's live or offline. So it's not offline, but not in a completely live session. But here again, we have it speaking to communication with the generative AI, with the bots, how to actually communicate in terms, again, prompt engineering. So there's a lot of things that are, as I say, dovetailing or synthesizing as we go. And then finally, the digital creation problem solving, again, speaking very much to the prompt engineering, the type of, let's say text, graphics, so forth that you do produce. You can produce, well, the generative AI will produce for you based on what you actually prompt it with, what you feed into it. So all of these are applicable. And then in terms of teaching and learning, we're now going to have to look at how we are actually going to integrate the digital literacy and the AI literacy, and actually integrate AI literacy with digital literacy. And then that is something that we all need to become proficient in. And I want to, so that, having mentioned that right now, I want to, just say I am not an expert in the sort of AI sort of things. I'm, investigating and experimenting as much as everybody else is, but I am going to, give you an overview of what is possible in terms of things like prompt engineering and so forth. Okay, I also dealt with this. This is just to give you a visualization of how all of these elements interact. So in terms of content knowledge, that is, the subject matter experts side of things. The subject inside and out. The different, let's put it this way, hurdles, challenges, whatever it might be. And then you have your teaching approach. This is specifically for lecturers, for academics. The teaching approach you use speaks to, the content and vice versa. But now we have this sphere coming in, the digital and AI literacy. So if you're combining that with your teaching approach, you have the knowledge of correct digital tools to use in order to, to actually put, well, actually, in this case, I would use this more in terms of assessment. How do I go about using, digital devices, apps, software, whatever it might be, to achieve my teaching goals, my teaching approach? How does it speak to, if you would like to say, also my teaching philosophy and so forth? These are all things that integrate here. On this side, you've got the digital and AI literacy speaking to the actual content. What is the best tool to be used within that particular content or subject field? But again, speaking, it cannot be taken away, from the teaching approach or even the research side, particularly now with the AI literacy side, which is, yes, the digital literacy is important in terms of research, but even more so now the AI literacy side is something that is really, been brought into focus in terms of producing any sort of research and things like theses, dissertations, and so forth, and research reports. In terms of the student, the same thing applies. They need to be able to understand, within the subject, what tools they need to use, be proficient in the use of them, and integrating it with what they know, integrating and applying their knowledge using these sort of tools. And then also on the academic literacy side, this speaks more, of course, to the way they express themselves, that the way they understand the discourse of the particular subject field, how they are actually supposed to communicate that knowledge to others. But again, looming large, we have the digital AI literacy because of the fact that everything is becoming far more networked, far more digital. Everywhere you turn, there's no way you can get away from it. But of course, this, as I've said in previous sessions, we have some issues in terms of students not having access to devices and so on. So this, unfortunately, there are some challenges there, but they really must, as with the lecturers or academics, there has to be this integration of all of these three elements, and there's the sweet spot there. That can be integrated efficiently and in a way that makes sense. You're able to apply it to the content that you're teaching, or that they're able to apply it to the content that they are being taught, for example. But it has to be combined with academic literacy. It really must. It's not something that is over and above the actual academic project, so to speak. It's something that is integrated, that we need to really mesh with what we're doing in terms of how can I put it, trying to scaffold that academic literacy. So we really are finding now that you can't, there's no separation here between the academic literacy and the digital literacy, as you can see. So here is another little triad. You have the AI literacy, the academic literacy, and this is speaking more strongly, I would say now, as I've mentioned, to the academic literacy side of things. But underneath it is the digital literacy. So this is a combination of a number of different capabilities. The digital capabilities we've been looking at, such as the proficiency and productivity, the different types of information and media literacies, communication aspect, digital creation and problem solving, and as we've just seen, and that's what I've been focusing on the last couple of slides, the digital teaching and learning, and how you combine all of these different elements to, as a whole. One thing I want to emphasize before I continue, though, is that this is it's iterative and it's experimental. There's no, I mean, in your particular subject, there might be a different balance of these three elements. There's no particular template, shall I say, for this sort of thing. Like it's 20% of this and 30% of that and 40% of that and so forth. It's not like that. You will adapt these three that I've shown previously, the content knowledge, your teaching knowledge, and digital AI literacy in different ways. So while it's being represented as this whole and in this triad, there's a balance that you yourself will have to find between them. And of course, now in terms of AI literacy, the most important thing I feel, and of course many feel, in higher education sphere is the idea of prompt engineering, how you communicate with generative AI or these bots, the LLMs, the large language models, and how you can actually interrogate them in an intelligent way in order to obtain the information that you need. But I really do feel, and especially at this point, I can't speak to, let's say, long term in the future. At this point, the sort of information that's being generated by these bots is not always, as we know. It hallucinates, it does all sorts of funny things. And that's why I think it's an incredibly good teaching tool, because then what you need to do is to get the students to do to actually interrogate the bot through prompt engineering. And that in itself actually is a way of learning. They have to, if they don't know the content that they're dealing with, they don't understand the content they're dealing with, their ability to prompt in, to actually create the proper prompts is going to be, it's going to be very difficult for them to do that. And that's almost like a reflective exercise, both for the student and for you, to see exactly where the students are at in terms of the subject matter. But we cannot definitely take out that aspect of critical thinking, the content knowledge, and the writing skills. That's another thing that I wanted to mention too, is the writing skills that are required. So it's actually a very useful tool from a whole different range of points of view in terms of the academic literacy we are trying to actually foster. And that is what we are really, that is our main focus, is the academic literacy. Yes, we do have these underpinning it at the moment, and things that we have to look at, with a certain amount of urgency. But our goal is to actually foster the academic literacy and use these tools to scaffold that as well. Okay, so in terms of a definition, I've been looking through a number of different resources, and this is one, surprisingly enough, this is from 2020, but I think, in fact, this particular paper is actually very, very useful, by Long and McGurko. That they had a bit of, it's quite prophetic in some of the things that they've identified. Of course, there was nothing there back in 2020 about prompt engineering, so it doesn't address that. But what they do is have a look at the different competencies required. Some maybe not so applicable now, and then also the design considerations in terms of learning. How you'll go about utilizing the AI, but also more importantly, as you'll see just now, interrogating AI as to what it is. But anyway, I found this to be quite a good definition, particularly as it focuses in on the critical evaluation of AI technologies and communication and collaboration. We've seen that already in the digital capability side, that ability to communicate and collaborate effectively with AI. But with AI, it means in terms of not just the AI, obviously, but other people, in terms of what comes out of your interaction with AI, but also using it as a tool. There's the proficiency again, proficiency in productivity, using it as a tool, but in a range of different contexts. At home, workplace, so forth. So it is quite a short definition, but to me it's succinct, and it does zero in on these particular things, particularly the communication and the collaboration and the critically evaluating it. And having read through that paper, I think, and then generally from what I'm seeing in terms of AI across the board, for me there are two different aspects to AI literacy. The first is the interrogation of AI. The next one is the use of AI. So there are two different aspects here. And I think it's important that we all understand, first of all, what AI is. There are different types of AI. The big thing now that's generating all the buzz and all the rest of it is generative AI. But we have the normal algorithmic AI patterns in the background, for example, in our social media. Those things that unfortunately feed us all of the ads on social media that drive us crazy. They're looking to see what your preferences are, and they're examining, where you're going. And as we know, the cookie story and all the rest of it. So there is that, but there are different types of AI. And I think that foundationally speaking, students really do need, particularly to understand what it can do. Think about who creates all of this, whether it's the coding behind it, the development of the large language models, who is doing it? Where are they located geographically? What might be there? Are there any sort of biases that might creep into the way things are programmed, coded? This is always an issue, of course, with any type of application or software. What is what who has developed it? Where does the data come from? How is it pulling the data? What is it sourcing? Where is it sourcing it, and so forth? And how does it work? I mean, not all of us can. I mean, myself included, I have a general idea of how it works, but not. But I think it's a good idea to understand that algorithmic type of thing where it's if you do this, then this will happen. If this then if then you go down the line of if this then that, if this then that, if this then that. So that's how it works, basically. I mean, you can go, if you're more mathematically and computer science inclined, you can go into all sorts of, right into the back end of it in the large language models. And I mean, I'm not competent to discuss that, but I do find it quite fascinating myself. And as I said, making the students also very aware, even though it's not to do really with this kind of generative AI we're dealing with today, the idea of the social media algorithms, but algorithms in general, in terms of biases, again, as I say, biases, the sort of, I mean, we see it on things like X, which was, of course, formerly Twitter. You've got to be very careful. I mean, I notice it myself very plainly when if I like certain things, I suddenly get a whole swath of swathe of similar tweets or messages related to that particular thing, to the extent sometimes it becomes rather annoying because you've just liked that particular thing for a particular reason, and all of a sudden it thinks, oh, well, she likes this, off we go, you get a whole deluge of things. So that, but to be more savvy in terms of, and this is where the well-being comes in, to be more savvy about what the system is delivering to you and how it delivers it to you and who the source is and who the source might be and things like that. So although I haven't dealt with the digital wellness aspect, which is one of the capabilities, this is where it starts coming in, particularly into the AI literacy side of things. And here we are looking at now, as we go more into examining exactly what's required for the AI literacy. Of course, we have the digital capabilities, and more so the digital proficiency and productivity, that ability to choose the tool, to understand what sort of context a particular tool can be used in, and so forth. And then also there's those information, data, and media literacies, which speak to some of the things I've been, the critical evaluation of a source and so forth. What how it's created, where it comes from, but more particularly that critiquing of what you actually are sourcing that comes into it. And again, as I've said, the digital well-being, what are you being exposed to? How are you being exposed to it? And so forth. Although this will not necessarily come into a more academic sphere, there is that idea of, you must question where the information comes from. It's not only the information itself, the validity and so forth, it's also where it comes from. So effectively, both of these in particular speak to the interrogation and the use of AI. Then, in terms of actually using it, as we're going to be looking at just now, you have the digital capability of that, the creation, problem solving, innovation side of things, as you'll see, and also the digital communication, collaboration, and participation. So those particular aspects, you're looking at digital and AI literacy itself, academic literacy, the integrity aspect, and also, of course, prompt engineering. So that these things mesh and integrate in that way, to form a whole, and to form that sort of integrated thinking around AI and how you will use it and what it actually serves up to you, and the critiquing and so forth. So it does form a whole. These digital capabilities and the AI literacy itself cannot really be separated, although the AI literacy is a whole subset and another field all on its own. Okay, in terms of prompt engineering, what I think we have to realize, as much as everybody's getting very excited about the whole issue, and it's fantastic, it is not a human conversation. It mimics human conversation, which I think is brilliant. I mean, I personally am very excited about this, but I still have those little sort of warning, how can I put it, warning lights going off, if I can put it in the back of my head, is like, yes, this is great, but like all of us do. But it's not really a human conversation. How does it work? This is a very basic description of how it works. You have the user input, and then there's the language learning model, the stuff that goes into the coding behind that, the way it works. what it does is essentially recognize patterns in order to produce it, and it's been trained, as they say, on literally petabytes of data, which is a lot of data. I mean, that it's a billions of bytes of data. Um, and then that's what it's looking at that. It's because of the way the language model has been trained. It's looking at the grammar, the syntax, all of those things. I don't want to speak to that because I am actually clueless as to how it's all done in the background. But I get the gist of what is actually going on. It recognizes a particular pattern, whether it's syntax, whatever. And I mean I'm talking about grammar now, not computer syntax. All that will come into it. The different type of syntaxes, and then producing something that it thinks is appropriate for whatever question you have asked it. So it manages to understand context, it can answer questions, it can summarize information, which it does quite well, I find, mostly. It can chat with you conversationally, but I've done with using Copilot recently, there have been some sort of glitches with weird hallucinations and things, and generation of images as well. So depending on the text you feed in, the description you feed in, it will generate something. Well, I can't say feels appropriate, but it appears appropriate in terms of how the language model is actually identifying the different patterns and meshing the information together. How it exactly does that, I don't know. I think it's actually amazing, but how it does I don't I'm not going to go into that. That would take a whole other session to actually examine. But again, there's this idea of it's not just these these resources that are on the web or the internet in general. You are putting stuff into these bots, like ChatGPT. That's the logo for ChatGPT. This is Copilot, which I'll look at now because that is a bits-based, well, not bits-based, but we have access to a protected version of it. But there is an issue with using it if you don't have a so-called protected login, as we all know. This information can be misused, well, not misused intentionally, but if you're feeding it in some sort of research data, which I would not do unless you're in our protected environment in the Microsoft environment, it fits. It will then deliver it into that massive amount of data, and it'll be pulled by somebody. It'll pull it for someone else in a different form. But especially if it's an idea that you're working on that is fairly unique. I mean, it's unlikely it's going to be that unique, but you don't want to feed in your research data, for example, and students need to be made very aware of that. You don't want your research data going into one of these, because it'll pull it for someone else in another form, but it'll be your idea, So that's something to be very, very aware of. Okay, at WITS, we do have access to Microsoft Copilot, and that can be accessed either in this via a browser. Edge, generally, much as I hate to admit it, because I'm not an Edge fan, is the browser, particularly WITS, that I've noticed. And this morning, I found something out when I went to go and have a look at something. I did go into it in Google, in Chrome, but it didn't come up with this protected sign, even though I was signed in with my staff account. I haven't noticed that before. It has been protected in Chrome before. So I am advocating at this point using Microsoft Edge, much as I'm not a fan of the browser, but it does make sense considering that Copilot is a Microsoft product. So there are different ways of accessing it. You can go to the URL, which is copilot.microsoft.com. However, there is a little pop-out that you can bring up. If, say, for example, that's asking me to sign into Google. That's not to sign here. I'm signed in. There's a little pop-out on the right-hand side of the browser in Edge where you can actually click on the Copilot logo and bring out this little pop-out chat window, which I find quite nifty. And again, it's showing you that protected symbol. Now, what that protection means is that anything that you put into Copilot is not retained. Any of the information, nor is the information it produces retained, as far as we know. I don't know how much one can guarantee this, but as long as it's in that protected mode, what you will find too is when you have a chat with it, it won't retain the history. You can in the other, like things like ChatGPT and Claude and so forth. You can actually ask it not to retain the chat, but then you don't have a history, which that is the one downfall of this. But at the same time, you can be assured. I'm not sure that I want to say that with 100% confidence, but as sure as you can be that it will not use that data in any way. It's not going out into the larger pool of data that these bots are accessing. At least that's the theory, as I say. I'm sorry if I'm a little bit cynical around that, but one just never knows exactly how secure it is. But as far as we know, as long as it's in this protected zone, in at bits, then the data shouldn't go anywhere. So I don't know if I'm going to go into the prompt engineering now, but what you can do if you want to log into Copilot, and we can move through it, and you can actually, as there are not that many people in this session, it might be an idea to actually go in and experiment with this. Wasn't expecting it to be this number of people, and it's actually better, as I think Shira said to begin with, so that we are actually we have time to do this sort of thing. So now I'm going to look at the different types of prompt patterns, because there are different patterns that they use for different purposes, or the people who have experimented in the last year or two, they've actually identified different ways of actually interrogating the bots, things like ChatGPT and Copilot. So there's the role-playing pattern, an audience pattern, and these are basic input-output to a large extent. It is a little bit more sophisticated than that, but they are input and output. But then we go into a more sort of like almost a more intelligent conversation, if I can put it that way, type of pattern, where there's the question refinement, there's cognitive verification, and flipped interaction pattern. These two are similar, but not quite. They have the same sort of pattern that they follow, and the same sort of objective of the. In fact, what will happen is that you're asking the bot to actually question you about certain subjects, or develop further questions itself to develop the output. But we'll have a look at that particular thing. And this particular section that I'm going through is available. The stuff is available in our draft staff guidelines for effective prompting, which we have sourced from a different number of open source sources. Obviously with a bit of our own mixed in, but I think a lot of stuff that in there comes from, for example, from SILT at UCT and so forth. But it is a very handy guide to go through, just as a very basic introduction to these prompt patterns and prompt engineering. There are certain ways. I mean, you have to be quite, in terms of your thinking, organized as you go into doing this. So they've created an acronym, the CREATE acronym. So obviously when you prompt, you need to actually be very clear on what it is you want. Defining the task, in the whole intent, what sort of information you might want in the output. Then, of course, relevant details, particularly contextualizing, where necessary, specific keywords, the facts. Give it as much information as you can. Actually, I've found in my travels with these bots, you need to give them as much information as you possibly can, and contextualize it as much as you can. Again, the use of examples, which speaks to that, different types of examples. And then also try to remove any unnecessary details in the prompt. Sometimes this is difficult because I've seen some prompts so that I wasn't able to fit in, going through on my travels through all of this. They have these ginormous, huge paragraphs of prompts. I don't think that's really necessary. I think some unnecessary details could have been removed. So to try your best to include everything as succinctly as possible, but obviously remove anything that's extraneous there. And this is the most important thing, and it's something I myself find frustrating: the tinkering. Testing and refining the different iterations. It will take more than one iteration to try and get what you want, and even then, sometimes it doesn't do what you want it to do, as I'm sure many of you have found out. You need to explore, as they said, the different types of versions, that you're using, the different types of patterns and so forth. And it's also interesting to try similar prompts on different platforms. It is, where you go between, let's say, Copilot and GPT, and the different types of answer it gives you. But even on the same platform, it can give you some really. 1 minute it can be quite lucid, if I could put it that way, and the next minute it's hallucinating. But anyway, that's another thing to find out. Okay, and also obviously, and this is something that we can bring into the whole teaching and learning sphere of things, evaluating the output and adjusting the prompt as required. So what you would essentially be doing with students here is for them to develop prompts, as I say, for them to develop a coherent prompt, something that will give them the information they need to understand the subject. That's then, in my opinion, how it works. Is if you don't understand what it is you're looking at, certainly you are going to query the bot about something you don't understand. but you have to have a certain level of understanding in order to create a prompt that will deliver what you need. So I think that is why prompt engineering is going to become so important in the academic sphere, because it is something that really I feel, and obviously many other people feel in teaching and learning, that will help the student to develop their knowledge, will enable them to express themselves too in terms of writing, a particular prompt, as to how, and using a good quality of writing. It doesn't have to be a thesis quality, in the lower levels, but just so that they express themselves in a certain way. Okay, to go on to the first one, which is role playing or persona pattern. This is a very basic one. What you're really wanting to do is to act as a particular person or persona, and then provide information about that topic, acting as that persona. So you need to specify what sort of role you want the tool to assume. Indicate the action you require the tool to perform. Give it a time frame, a particular time frame, let's say a historical time frame, or, yes, I would say historical, a period, a time period. It's a bit misleading, this particular point I find, is like, it sounds like you've got to give it a time frame. You can give it a time frame, an actual time frame, and say, I only want 5 examples of, or whatever it might be. Again, very important, the context or location of your prompt, like geographic location, but the subject-wise, the context, and so forth. And then give them the reason, give it the reason why, the motivation, reason, or goals governing why you want to do this. And this has actually been incorporated into the guide. It's from in your Kundi in 2023, what they call the 5 Ws. But this one is fairly basic. But here is an example of the pattern. And I don't know if people would like to give this a go. I think we do have time to actually look at this if you want to give this a go. It's generally saying, and the example here is of a senior historian specializing in the French Revolution, and then telling the bot, given that persona, that's the persona you have described as senior historian specializing in the French Revolution, explain the key events and reasons leading to the downfall of the French monarchy. So the format, the template, is assume the persona of a particular type of person, type of speciality, who has a particular specialization, and given that persona, explain whatever. You don't need to, if you want to do it now, you don't need to use this specific, obviously, example, but you can think of one in your own subject, which I think will be quite helpful. I'm actually going to come out of the presentation. I want to actually put it into the bot and see what we get. Okay, I hope you can see my screen. I'm just going to copy and paste this into Copilot. Click on submit and let's see what it comes up with. Okay, it goes on for quite some time, and it gives you all the different points that it needs to give you. And it's quite, I mean, I'm not a specialist in this particular area of history, but it looks pretty solid to me. Although the first time I tried this, it gave me a huge number of different points, more so than this. But the idea here, of course, is the persona. Who is it that you're asking to actually, what level is it supposed to produce? So what I'm going to do now is Control V. Let's say you are an undergraduate student. Well, let's write it more. A second year student studying the French Revolution. Given that persona, explain the key events. Let's see if it'll give us something. I'm interested to see if it'll give us something different. It should. Okay, let's have a look to see. It's interesting that it's similar but not quite the same. The language is a little bit different. The language, I'm noticing, I'm analyzing this very quickly. Execution. Yes, it's in a much more simple language, a language that it seems to think that a second year student would come out with, compared to somebody who has, quite a bit of knowledge, a senior historian. I don't know. It's debatable, but it's interesting to see what it's actually come up with here. Has anybody given it a try on their side, that particular prompt?
Um,
Mm.
I tried it a different prompt um on both ChatGPT and on Copilot.
Yes.
ChatGPT assumed that um a very, very friendly tone as if they're talking to a friend, and
Hmm.
Copilot gave me a bullet point list.
Well, like you just said, that's the thing. Between different bots, there can be different types of responses. So it's interesting that ChatGPT gave you that more friendly, user-friendly response. Interesting. Thanks for that response there.
Um, this was the prompt,
Oh,
and I spelled globalization wrong.
okay. If you just that is actually, yeah. It doesn't really matter how you spell the globalization. That's interesting.
Apparently,
Uh,
it thinks that people in 1930s Europe were very friendly people.
Apparently, do you think historically did it come up with the right? So it didn't reference something that happened post 1930s. Just as a matter of interest.
It's very stereotypical. It's not very correct on
Mm-hmm.
how it's presenting. This is ChatGPT, um, Eastern Europe, if that makes sense. It's essentially assuming that people who live there are people who live in small villages.
Well, okay, that's interesting. That's very interesting. So there's a certain point of view. It's taken it from a certain point of view, and you're wondering where it's getting that from. That's very interesting. It's a very interesting example to give. Wonderful. So let me just stop sharing my screen, the Copilot screen. Now I'm going to go into more prompt patterns. I'm not going to stop because we don't have that much time left, and there are quite a few prompt patterns that I need to go through. So I'm just going to share my presentation again. I won't be a second. Yeah. Okay, so the other is the audience pattern. It's almost, but not quite related. You want the bot to explain a particular subject to you. Assume and then tell it. You tell it that I am this particular audience. I am persona Y. Okay. So basically, you are you want information around a particular subject, but you are a particular type of person, in a particular age, a particular with particular amount of knowledge and so forth. So this can be helpful in terms of summarizing, translating, and so forth, the paraphrasing, which at times the bots are quite good at. So an example here would be you're a senior historian, again using that example, specializing in the French Revolution. Given that persona, explain the key events and reasons leading to the downfall of the French monarchy in terms that a beginner. So there's the persona, there. Um, the audience level, so to speak, would understand. So that's how you would use the audience pattern. So that's another one that you can experiment with. Now, these are the ones that I feel are the best to be using with the students. You can use the others. Depends, again, as I always say, it depends on your needs, on the needs of your subject, the way, what you're teaching and so forth. But these are the refining interrogation patterns are interesting. I'm going to look there. There's also a template pattern, but that's a bit more sophisticated. But I'm going to be looking at these three types. So they are best for these type of more complex tasks, and you're actually going more deeply into a subject, ostensibly anyway. But anyway, there are three. There's the question refinement, there's cognitive verification, and there's flipped interaction. So let's first look at the question refinement. So this is it's a very good way of actually developing scaffolding knowledge and so forth if it gives you the right answer. So what you asking the bot to do is to give you a better version of the question, you know, to actually look at your question, what the question, ask me if I'd like to, and then ask them. Then you say to it needs to ask you if you'd like to use the better question. That's an optional thing. So the pattern for this is for example, whenever I ask a question about a specific topic, suggest a more refined question, which is quite something. considering whatever it might be, and ask if I want to proceed with a refined question. And then you see what the bot comes out with in terms of the more refined question. But again, you need those critical evaluation skills. You need to critique, you need to be able to critique what it's producing all the time. I mean, even if it's something like this where you've asked it to suggest a better version of the question, you need to know whether it is a better version of the question. So these are the sort of things where you can start getting that critical thinking going with the students. And, depending on how refined the question is, they will hopefully, and I'm thinking also now in the future as we go forward, that the bots will be able to assist the students in developing these critical thinking skills. But get to a point where they are producing, having said that, producing information that is logical, is not hallucinated, and so forth. So it's quite an interesting pattern, that one. The next one is the cognitive verification pattern. Okay, in this, what you need to do is actually set out a set of rules for the bot to follow, the GAI tool to follow. Then, interestingly, you're asking it to generate sub-questions for you to answer, and then you specify obviously the number of questions to ask, and then you instruct the tool to combine the answers to the sub-questions it provides to generate the final answer to the main overall question, which is quite a fascinating pattern. So, to give you an example, this you can do a very basic example like this. If you ask a question about climate change, break it down into 3 smaller questions that would help you provide a more accurate answer. Again, it's to do with that questioning pattern, but it's slightly more sophisticated. And then combine the answers to these sub-questions to give the final answer. So that is I think is quite a nifty thing. I haven't experimented as much as I would like with this particular question type. Again, one has to be careful of the answer given, and that really, in many cases, especially if it's in the subject field, will take somebody who knows at least something about the subject. And thinking about this as I'm talking to you, obviously, when you are training the students in prompt engineering, which is what is going to have to happen, particularly in your subject field, you will need to train the students in how to prompt these bots efficiently and get them to start. They're not going to come out with this of their own accord. Particularly at the lower undergraduate levels, you will need to actually provide some sort of scaffolding or some sort of example, however briefly, in a particular class or whatever it might be, to get them to start thinking in a specific way, the algorithmic thinking particularly, and to understand how these bots work, as I mentioned earlier. But this is quite a sophisticated example of a pattern, which I find quite fascinating, and I would like to. I haven't used this to the degree I would like to. But it is something I think is quite nifty. Then the flipped interaction pattern, which is very, very similar to the previous one, that sort of interrogation. This particular one, this verification example where it's interrogating. It's similar. You first specify what you want to do. I want you to ask me. Here you're saying I want you to ask me questions to achieve a particular goal. And then focus on this particular topic or whatever it might be, the outcome. You need to specify the duration of the interaction and the number of questions, mostly the number of questions. Okay, that's the best thing I find, is to ask it, to give you, to use a number of questions. But you could say you should ask me questions. This depends how long this will go on. You should ask me questions until you have sufficient information to produce the desired outcome. Now, understand that is the desired outcome in terms of the bot. Not necessarily you, but hopefully, if you have actually crafted this in a way, the question, if you've crafted the initial question in a specific way, it'll come out with something coherent. So, for example, here, I want to create a lecture plan on climate change for South African University first-year course. You should ask me questions until you have enough information to create the lecture plan. Ask one question at a time. That's quite I must admit, in terms of this sort of thing, the bots are actually quite good in coming out with lesson plans, rubrics, all this sort of thing, although this is not necessarily to do with this pattern, but you can use it for something like that. And I think it's quite fascinating, this, that you're able to actually ask it to start. It's almost like a Socratic dialogue in terms of that. So there's a slight difference between this flipped interaction and the cognitive verification example. Here you're asking it, about a particular topic, and then break it down into so many smaller questions that would help you provide a more accurate answer. Combine the answers. Whereas with this one, the flipped interaction, it's questioning you. You are being questioned by the bot in order to produce the outcome, hopefully, that you want. So that's that particular, So there are different types here of patterns that one needs to get used to. I'm sure there are more. I'm looking at the most common ones. I'm sure people are developing different patterns for different purposes, and I think this will become a speciality eventually, if it hasn't already, in terms of specific subject fields. So you will find if you experiment with these different types of patterns and combine them, you may find something that's more suited to your particular subject field. So in terms of tips for prompting, take time to develop your prompts, which I must admit I'm guilty of not doing. I have I have not really had a session where I've sat down and really crafted a lovely prompt. I tend to experiment by putting stuff into the bots, but I really should do that myself. And again, it's the idea of not expecting something immediate in terms of the result. You are already in control in some ways of the bot, and I think that's something that's important to emphasize. It's not that you're in a position where you are wanting specific information from the bot, and you are the one crafting the prompt, and it's not a question of being at the mercy of the bot. Well, sometimes it might be, depending on the type of hallucinated stuff they can come out with. And it is, as I've mentioned, an iterative process. And then combining multiple patterns. This example gives you a combination of the cognitive verification question and role-playing pattern. So, I mean, this is quite incredible. Okay, produce a better version of my original question, which is that cognitive verification. Then use the answers to suggest a better version of my original question. That's question refinement. After the follow-up questions, temporarily act as a user with no knowledge of AWS, which is the Amazon Web Services, and define any terms that I need to know accurately to actually answer the question. So that's role-playing again. You're in the role of a user with no knowledge of that particular system. Also, but again, the big question, be aware of the data sources, and that there will definitely be a bias towards particular mainstream knowledge and languages particularly, and also the debate around it's sourcing a lot of stuff from the so-called global north as opposed to the global south. There are all sorts of debates that can be had around this, the biases and the ethical things and all sorts of things, but we unfortunately don't have to go time to go into them now. Again, as I have emphasized when we were looking at Copilot, be very careful of what you feed into the tool. And it's used to train the model. So if it's used to train the model, it'll spit it out somewhere else. Not necessarily in the same form, but it will spit out the ideas somewhere else. And of course, always critically review any outputs, as always. Okay, I have discovered a very useful tool that is produced by JISC, as part of their AI, literacy AI in tertiary education project. And it's assessment ideas for an AI-enabled world. And what it does is, and it's interactive. It's an interactive PowerPoint where it's indexed and you can have a look at things in different contexts. These are just 3 examples from what they've actually supplied. For example, you can navigate using these buttons. This is not a live guide that I can use. There is an index. You can go to a home page, but they're all different things. There's that's open book. This is quizzes. That one is, I'm not too sure what that one, prompt engineering, I think it might have been. And then the D is the more sort of general questions. But this one, here's an example of an activity, an AI prompt competition. So the students, excuse me, will have to identify a major question or challenge in their discipline, preferably with no clear solution. And then they have to collaborate on developing and agreeing to 5 to 10 criteria for assessing the responses generated by one of these tools or bots. And then individually, they go off individually write a prompt for AI to answer the question. And then in small groups, use their criteria to judge the responses of the other students and rate the AI prompts responses from best to worst. And then write up a report or reflection on that process. I think it's a really good, in terms of getting the students used to the use of the bots, I think it's a very good exercise, particularly contextualized within a specific subject. And this is very much a learning opportunity. What they have is the different grades of difficulty, well, in this case, what they do focus on in general. I'm only showing you 3 of these. I think there are probably about 30 to 40 or so of these examples in this particular PowerPoint, which I am going to, it is supplied in a zip file that I'm going to upload just now. But it looks at the level of authenticity, the amount of challenge for the students, what sort of product will be produced, the learning involved, the demand on the staff, how much of the staff's time is necessary, how much, are you going to be involved in this, and then its degree of lifelong learning, how it's actually preparing for lifelong learning. And then debating with AI. Okay, again, choosing a major question or challenge in your particular field. And they can do this individually or in a group. They present this to the bot and then engage in a debate with it by questioning the responses. So this is now when you actually question the bot itself. And then again, it says that in terms of your role, you may have to provide some guidance around questioning strategies. This is why it's so important for us to develop our own prompt engineering skills, because we will have to assist in training the students in the use of these bots. And then they have to produce an argumentative essay based on their dialogue with AI, evaluating both their own position and that of AI, which I think is quite nifty. And again, you have what I've got to mention in the previous slide. It tells you exactly the different skills it's trying to develop, like critical evaluation, problem solving, AI literacy, independent thinking, contextual intelligence, particularly, which is very important. And the different ways you can do it. You can actually, do as a group debate in class, and then online or in face-to-face, or an online forum. And it could also be written with video, audio, and so forth. So the different types, it's mingling in the digital literacy side of things here as well. But then again, it has been vetted by JISC, so they are making sure that those capabilities are integrated. And a final example, just one of very, very, very many in this pack. They have to generate a short 200-word response to an open question. They then individually complete a pro forma, which includes elements in the AI-generated answers, such as quality of writing, language reference. This is more around the writing skill side. Then they discuss their findings in small groups. And then they have to give a presentation, a joint presentation on the process. And then they might also be, asked to individually or collaboratively write a better written piece. So that's very good in terms of writing skills. And so that is the end of this particular presentation. Are there any comments or ideas that anybody might have around this, around what I have presented? It is a lot of information, as always, with these things. Was I sharing my screen there?
No, you're not sharing your screen now.
No, but it was showing when I was doing.
Yeah.
Was it?
Yes.
Okay, good. I don't know. I didn't unshare it, so I came back and it's saying share. So I was wondering if it was visible. That's why I'm asking. So it is quite a if I can put it this way, a mindful of stuff that one has to take into consideration. So I don't know if anybody has any comments or ideas. Questions?
Admit just the structuring of how to structure your AI prompts is very useful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely going to take that into my own work.
Yeah, good. It is, and it's also, I mean, I'm very enthusiastic about it. Actually, I really am enthusiastic about it. But one also has to be. I keep on going on about the cautions of the hallucination and everything, and it is something that one has to take into consideration. But as I say, for that reason, at this point, it is a very good teaching tool, as long as the students are trained properly in the use of it, and you yourself have critically examined results of certain types of prompt patterns and so forth. I think that's one of the biggest things to take away from this, is that you have to look at the different prompt patterns and experiment them with them in your particular field. It doesn't mean you have to dedicate on into something like this, but just every now and again, try different prompt patterns. Think of a particular question that the students might, you might want the students to pose. Look at the different ways in which the generative AI answers it. So it's very important for you to actually experiment with yourself before, rolling it out to the students and understanding how it may or may not respond to something.
Hi, Fiona.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I'm on Chrome on Copilot, and it does seem to have the commercial data protection symbol there, so it seems to be working. Yeah.
Thanks for that, because this morning when I went into it, it wasn't showing the protection symbol. Good, great. So it is. So thanks for checking that
but
out.
this was so useful for.
I'm upstairs now. I'm just going to log out of them.
Sure. Did you want?
Oh,
Okay.
sorry, guys. Didn't realize my microphone was open.
Just to say, it's so useful to have this access to Copilot, and it's actually really great. I was at a conference recently where lots of people in their presentations were using AI generated images, which is really appealing because you could create an image that really spoke to what you wanted to say, rather than just like searching through stock images.
Yes.
So two interesting things when you spoke about bias is I suggested it to a friend of mine who was making a presentation for an anesthetic conference. And I had a look, and it had made all these beautiful images, but every single anesthetist had made as a white male.
Yes.
So to talk about bias, I was like, did you notice that? And they're like, oh, I didn't actually notice, but something to
Yes.
be aware of. But also, I just wanted to ask with regards to if you're going to use it for something like that, what's the sort of um, like attributation you need to give to say that these images were generated and, you know, with regards to sort of like referencing and that sort of things. Do you know what the expectations are around that?
I cannot speak in terms of bits, but they must reference it inside and say I used this, I used this in order to generate this, or partially the stuff in here has been partially generated by AI. There are ways of actually doing it. I just want to bring up we have got some guidelines, draft research, but these are all the guides we have are draft draft versions. They're not intended as definitive final versions because of the fact that everything is in such flux, as you can imagine. It's not in terms of, we don't have any definitive answer on this, but there are different ways of attributing. I just want to find. Yeah.
In the CLTD, on the building side, it's very useful if you say which AI you used.
Yes.
It's also so that you don't like make students think it is a real image. There are students that don't know how to recognize images made by AI, and it's important to identify those images.
Yes. It is very important. I just want to get to, we have got a section in the student guide, which actually shows you how to, yes. Okay, I'm just going to share this particular window of mine quickly. Okay, these are, acknowledging where you've pulled it from. For example, an in-text citation, author year, optional can be the long responses from ChatGPT, can be included in appendix or an online supplement. The example is OpenAI, 2023. That's if you have an in-text. Or reference list entry, OpenAI 2023. Specify the bot, as you said, the actual bot that you need to use, which version, and then for example, that is just an example. I mean, this is not set in stone. This is a preliminary example of how you would actually reference, something that you've drawn from AI. But as long as you reference it in some way, you must make a reference to it. But these are the formats that it suggests, that they've suggested in this particular guide.
Thanks, that really helps.
Okay, fantastic. In fact, I'll upload this guide as well. I've put the digital AI and digital literacy pack there, but I'll upload this as well for you, just so that you've got it as well. Okay. It's in there. It's in that particular guide. I've only put the other one's the prompt engineering guide that's in the pack, but this is the student guide. But it's very much a work in progress. It's very much why it's a draft. That's why we call them drafts. So I think that's it. I think I've that's it from my side. If anybody would like to say anything else, anything further, I think we can bring this to a close.
Just wanted to say thank you so much for today.
That's a pleasure. I hope that the series has been useful to people. I have gone into quite some depth around the literacy side of things, but I hope it's actually given some food for thought in terms of what is really necessary in terms of integrating both the digital and AI literacy into teaching and learning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for attending.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.